Over the past few episodes, we have been on the battlefield of Antietam, just outside of Sharpsburg, Maryland, where one of the most violent battles of the Civil War took place. We started off, up around the cornfield and worked our way down to the Dunker Church and also the Sunken Road. And throughout all of those episodes, you might have been wondering, where is General McClellan during all of this? Or maybe you weren't wondering that, but now you are. Well, the answer is right here at a place called the Pry House. This property served as the headquarters for the Army of the Potomac during the Battle of Antietam, was also a signal station, and served as a field hospital. So today, we're going to take a look, real briefly, at the Pry House and talk about some of the goings-on here during the Battle of Antietam. Like I said, right now we are standing on what would have been the Pry Farm in 1862. Now, the Army of Northern Virginia had already moved through here and had set up camp on the other side of the Antietam Creek, just on the outskirts of Sharpsburg. We're on the eastern side of Antietam Creek right now. And on September 16th of 1862, poor Philip and Elizabeth Pry were going to have their lives completely upended when someone from the Army of the Potomac knocked on their door and basically said that they were going to be setting up a Union Army headquarters right here on this site. Now, anywhere that any army went, Confederate or Union, whenever they set up someplace during the Civil War, it was bad news for the inhabitants. Fences were going to be torn down and used for firewood. The cornfield that Mr. Pry had would basically be trashed, and the corn used for feeding the horses. There was going to be all kinds of damage done here, but it's from this place right here where George McClellan is going to command the Army of the Potomac during the Battle of Antietam. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a look inside. All right, we just got into the Pry House museum here, and here's our boy George McClellan, who is going to be setting up his headquarters here at the Pry House. And from the Pry House, I mean, it's up on a high point, as you could see outside, but the field of view of the battlefield itself is really kind of limited. You can see right up the middle, but you can't see like the cornfield or the East Woods in the north, or what's now called the Burnside Bridge to the south. What we're looking at here is some of the Union reserve positions that were here at the Pry House. And then if we look over here, well, they have an information panel talking a little bit about the Pry family. So this is Philip Pry right here, and his wife Elizabeth Pry. And I talked about the damage that was done on their property. Here they have a copy of the claim. They lost 2 horses, 2 beef cattle, 10 sheep, 7 hogs. I imagine that some of that went to feed the guys who were camped out here. And then you can see like all of these panels of post fence. So anyway, whenever we think about these battles, we typically only think about the soldiers that are involved, but the people really suffer here as well. So speaking of civilians, they also have a section here talking about the civilian volunteers at Antietam. So right here, this is not at Antietam, this is at Brandy Station, this is the U.S. Sanitary Commission. But somebody who you may have heard of who operated right here in Antietam was Clara Barton. She was a clerk at the patent office in Washington, D.C., and realized the effect, the negative effect that a lack of food and clean water had on soldiers. So anyway, she organized these campaigns to get, supplies and medical supplies and things like that to the battle sites. And she was here on September 17th of 1862. She provided surgeons with medical supplies, got water to thirsty soldiers, and also did some minor surgery. There was a report that she removed a bullet from a soldier's cheek with a pocket knife. Now, this guy right here is Jonathan Letterman. He was the medical director of the Army of the Potomac in 1862. And it was his efforts to kind of organize field hospitals and set up a triage system that really kind of revolutionized how medicine was done in the military. A lot of his practices are still used today. But anyway, this field hospital would have been run by Jonathan Letterman. Now, during the Battle of Antietam, there were a couple of Union generals who were wounded and were brought here to the field hospital at the Pry House. One of them was the 1st Corps commander, Joseph Hooker. Now, I say that this is depicting the wounding of Hooker. That's just an assumption that I am making. On the morning of the battle, Hooker was mounted on his horse in the vicinity of the cornfield when a bullet struck him in the foot. And he actually didn't even realize that he had been hit until he went to dismount and was kind of suffering from loss of blood. Miraculously, the bullet passed through his foot without hitting any bone. So they put him on a stretcher and brought him here to the Pry House to be treated. He was later relocated to Washington, D.C., where he recovered and was back at it by November of 1862, although he wasn't able to get on a horse unaided. But yeah, Joseph Hooker himself was treated right here at the Pry House. They have a really interesting book here that talks about some different case studies of individuals who were wounded during the Civil War and how those different wounds were treated and what the effect was. The one that probably interests me the most, now these are all Antietam injuries, by the way, but the one that really stands out to me is this one right here. This is Private Patrick Hughes of the 4th New York Infantry. He had a musket ball that hit him in the back of the dang head and traversed a portion of his brain and then exited higher up on the skull. And it says here that he dragged himself from the field and was sent to a field hospital in a barn near Keedysville. And on September 20th went on to Hagerstown and then went to a larger hospital in D.C. Lived. He was coherent at all times. And the wound healed, and the only long-term effect was uncontrollable giddiness occasionally and impaired vision on his right eye. Yeah, pretty crazy. Hooker wasn't the only general to be treated here at the Pry House. Israel Richardson, who was the division commander for the 1st Division of the 2nd Corps, was wounded at the Sunken Lane while directing his troops. And there was like a spherical case shot that went off, and one of the balls entered into his body and ruptured one of his internal organs. But anyway, he was also treated in the upstairs here at the Pry House. What we are looking at here is the very room where Israel Richardson was treated for his injuries. And you can see they have him depicted, being laid up on this bed in the upstairs room of the Pry House. And he was deemed to be in too critical a condition to move. Now, keep in mind, this wound is sustained on September 17th. He is here all through September. He's here all through the month of October. And his wife ends up coming here to help treat him. But he would eventually get pneumonia and would die on November 3rd of 1862. One of 6 generals to die here at Antietam. This is a really interesting information panel that they have about medicines in the Civil War. So this is a picture of a guy by the name of Surgeon General William Alexander Hammond, who attempted a lot of reforms as far as, like drugs and pharmaceuticals. And they have a rather disturbing picture here of the harmful effects of some medicine that used mercury. There's a guy by the name of Private Carlton Bergen, who had come down with pneumonia of all things, and he was administered 2 scruples of the mercury-based drug calomel, and 1 of just mercury with chalk. Well, he got an ulcer in his mouth. The ulcer grew, became gangrenous, and destroyed this part of his face. So from the upper lip to the eye, it just kind of deteriorated, and he ended up having to have plastic surgery to correct the holes in his face. But he would live for another 53 years beyond this. That is wild. All right, well, there you go. There's just a little bit on the Pry House, McClellan's headquarters during the Battle of Antietam. Now, McClellan justifiably gets criticized for a lot of things. One of them really is being too detached. And here at the Pry House, I mean, he is way, way back off of the battle line, really too far detached. You don't want to be too close, but you don't want to be as far back as what he was right here. But if you ever come to Antietam, come to this place. It's going to help you to understand the bigger picture a lot more than you would otherwise.